The wind that night didn't just cut through the streets, it felt like it was chasing her. Maya Carter ran barefoot across the cold pavement, her breath breaking into uneven bursts as the city blurred around her. New York never slept. But tonight it was watching. Watching her run. Watching her fall apart. Watching her try to escape something she never imagined her own family would do. Behind her, footsteps echoed. Heavy. Relentless. Getting closer. Stop her. The voice sliced through the air. Maya didn't turn back. She already knew who they were. And worse, she knew who sent them. Just 1 hour earlier, everything had still been normal. Or at least, what passed for normal in her world. A cramped apartment in Queens. Bills stacked on the table. Silence filled with tension. Her father hadn't looked at her in weeks. Her brother had stopped smiling months ago. And yet, nothing could have prepared her for what she heard that night. Maya had been standing in the hallway. Quiet, invisible, like she always tried to be. Voices came from the kitchen. At first, she ignored them. Another argument, she thought. Another fight about money. But then, she heard a name. A name that didn't belong in their world. Whitmore. Her body froze. Daniel Whitmore. A billionaire. A man whose face appeared on news channels. A man her brother had no business even mentioning. He leaves every Thursday, Brandon said casually. Same time, same car. Maya's heart began to race. Her father spoke next. And once we grab him, everything disappears. A pause. Then, our debt gone. Maya felt the floor disappear beneath her. Debt. Grab him. No. No, no, no. This wasn't real. You're sure he won't suspect anything? Brandon asked. He trusts the system, her father replied coldly. And I made sure his name is already part of the deal. Maya stepped back slowly, her breathing shallow, her mind spinning. They weren't just talking about money anymore. They were planning something else. Something dangerous. Something irreversible. A kidnapping. The floor creaked. A small sound. But loud enough. Too loud. The voices stopped. Silence. Then, footsteps. The kitchen door opened. Brandon stood there, staring directly at her. And in that moment, everything changed. You heard that, he said. Not a question. A statement. Maya tried to speak, but no words came out. Her father appeared behind him. His face wasn't angry. It was worse. Cold. Empty. Decided. The next few minutes blurred together. Shouting. Grabbing. Fear. Two men entered the apartment. Strangers. Dangerous. Silent. Maya struggled. But her brother's grip tightened. Her father didn't even look at her. She knows, Brandon said. A pause. Then the words that broke everything. She's a problem. Her father exhaled slowly. Then nodded. The debt is 400,000. One of the men spoke. Calm. Almost bored. There's a solution. Maya's stomach dropped. The man continued. Your debt disappears. A beat. In exchange for her. Silence filled the room. But this silence was different. It wasn't hesitation. It was agreement. Maya felt something inside her collapse. Not fear. Not shock. Something deeper. Betrayal. They're not serious, she whispered. But no one answered. Because they were. Her brother avoided her eyes. Her father picked up his phone. And that was the moment Maya understood. They weren't going to stop. They had already decided. So she ran. The bathroom window. Glass. Cold air. A drop. Pain. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Now, she was running through Manhattan, with 3 men behind her. Men sent by her own family. Her lungs burned. Her feet bled. But she kept moving, because there was only one place she could go. One person who needed to know. Daniel Whitmore. She turned the final corner. And there it was. The townhouse. Lights glowing. Security outside. A black car waiting. And him, standing at the top of the steps. Calm. Composed. Unawares. Maya pushed the last of her strength forward. Her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the pavement. A guard moved instantly, grabbing her, stopping her. Stay back. But before he could pull her away, a voice cut through. Wait. Daniel Whitmore raised his hand. And everything stopped. Maya lifted her head. Her vision blurred. Her body shaking. But her voice was clear. My father and my brother did this. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. Daniel stepped closer. His expression didn't change. But his eyes, they focused, sharpened. What's your name? He asked calmly. Maya. A breath. Maya Carter. The guard spoke quickly. Sir, she needs. Daniel raised one finger. Silence again. Who's chasing you? He asked. My family. Her voice trembled. And the men they work for. A pause. Then, why? Maya looked directly at him and said the one thing that changed everything. They're going to kidnap you. Silence. The wind slowed. The street held its breath. The guard scoffed. That's ridiculous. Marcus. Daniel's voice. Quiet. Firm. The guard stopped. Maya continued. My father owes money. And someone offered to erase it. Daniel didn't interrupt. In exchange. A breath. For you. Snow began to fall. Soft. Silent. Daniel Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. Then asked one final question. Why come here? Maya's answer was simple. Honest. Unshakable. Because if it's true, you deserve to know. A pause. Then, and if it's not, you're the only one who can stop them. Daniel stood still, thinking, calculating, reading her. Then finally, he spoke. Bring her inside. The guard hesitated. Sir. Now. The door opened. Warm light spilled into the cold night. And as Maya stepped inside, she didn't know it yet, but she had just changed the course of everything. Because Daniel Whitmore had already made a decision. And by morning, someone would regret it. The door of Daniel Whitmore's townhouse closed with a quiet, solid sound. But for Maya, it felt like the final barrier between two completely different worlds. Outside, the cold Manhattan night continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passing, distant sirens, snow settling softly across the streets. Inside, however, everything felt still, controlled, and unnervingly calm. The warmth hit her first, not just from the temperature, but from the atmosphere itself, polished floors, soft lighting, and the faint scent of cedar that lingered in the air. It was the kind of place that didn't just belong to wealth, but to power, real power, the kind her father had tried to sell. Maya stood just inside the entrance, her body still trembling, her bare feet cold against the marble floor, her mind struggling to keep up with what was happening. She had escaped something terrible, but she had stepped into something far bigger. Daniel Whitmore walked past her without urgency, removing his gloves slowly, his expression unreadable. He did not rush to comfort her. He did not overwhelm her with questions. Instead, he moved with precision, as if every second was being measured and placed exactly where it needed to be. That alone unsettled her more than panic would have. Lock the doors, he said calmly. Marcus, his security chief, immediately moved to comply. The sound of electronic locks engaging echoed faintly through the hall, sealing the house like a fortress. Maya noticed it. She understood it. This wasn't just protection for her, it was preparation for something else. Daniel turned toward her then, his gaze steady and analytical. "For now," he said, "you are safe here." The way he said it made one thing clear: this safety was temporary, conditional, dependent on what came next. Before Maya could respond, another presence entered the room. An older woman, composed and observant, stepped forward with quiet authority. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, and her posture carried a sense of control that only comes from years of experience. This was Mrs. Jenkins, the house manager. Her eyes softened when she looked at Maya, but not out of pity, out of understanding. "You're freezing," she said gently, already assessing the situation without needing answers. Maya tried to say she was fine, but the words barely left her lips. The adrenaline that had kept her running was fading, and in its place came exhaustion, pain, and the overwhelming realization of what had just happened. Daniel didn't interrupt. He simply nodded once toward Mrs. Jenkins. "Take her upstairs, make sure she's seen by a doctor." That was it, no hesitation, no debate. A decision had been made. As Maya followed Mrs. Jenkins up the staircase, she couldn't help but glance back. Daniel was already speaking quietly with Marcus, his tone low but focused. He wasn't reacting emotionally to her story. He was processing it, breaking it apart, analyzing every piece. And somehow that made her feel both safer and more afraid at the same time. Upstairs, the guest room felt unreal. Large, quiet, and perfectly arranged, it was the complete opposite of everything Maya had ever known. The bed alone looked more expensive than anything she had ever touched in her life. For a moment, she just stood there, unsure if she even belonged in that space. Mrs. Jenkins moved efficiently, setting out clean clothes and pointing toward the bathroom. "You'll feel better after you clean up," she said softly, "and after that, the doctor will take a look at your injuries." Maya sat slowly on the edge of the bed, her body finally giving in to the weight of everything. "Does this happen often?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Jenkins paused for a moment before answering. "No," she said, "but when it does, it usually means something serious has begun." That answer stayed with Maya, because deep down she already knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Downstairs, Daniel Whitmore stood in his study, the atmosphere entirely different from the calm of the rest of the house. Here, everything was active, strategic, controlled. Marcus stood near the wall, reviewing security feeds, while Daniel remained still, his mind clearly working several steps ahead. "You believe her?" Marcus asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the window, looking out at the snow-covered courtyard. "I believe she believes what she heard," he said finally. Marcus exhaled slowly. "That's not the same thing." "No," Daniel replied, "but it's enough." He turned back toward Marcus, his expression now sharper, more focused. "Call Pierce." Marcus nodded immediately. Detective Alan Pierce wasn't just any contact. He was one of the few people Daniel trusted when things moved beyond business and into something more dangerous. Within 30 minutes, Pierce arrived. He looked exactly like someone who had been pulled out of sleep for something urgent, coat still cold from the outside, expression alert but tired. "Let me guess," Pierce said as he stepped into the study. "This isn't a social call." Daniel gestured toward the chair. "A woman came here tonight," he said. "She claims there is a plan to kidnap me." That got Pierce's full attention. "Now that," he said slowly, sitting down, "is not something I hear every day." The conversation that followed was not emotional. It was precise, methodical, and serious. Maya's story was broken down piece by piece. What she heard, how she heard it, who was involved, and most importantly, what it meant. When Maya was brought downstairs, she felt the shift immediately. The room was no longer about her safety. It was about something much bigger. Pierce studied her carefully as she spoke, listening without interruption. When she finished, the silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was calculation. "I think she's telling the truth," Pierce said finally. Marcus crossed his arms. "Then we've got a problem." Daniel remained calm. "No," he said quietly, "we have information." That one sentence changed everything. Because for Daniel Whitmore, information was power. And someone had just made the mistake of giving him exactly what he needed. As the night stretched toward morning, a plan began to form. Not a defensive one, not a reaction, but something else entirely. Something controlled, something deliberate, something dangerous. Pierce leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting. If they're planning to grab you, he said, they'll move fast, probably tomorrow. Maya felt her stomach tighten. Tomorrow, it was happening that soon. Marcus looked at Daniel. We can shut everything down, cancel the meeting, increase security. Daniel shook his head. No. The word was simple, but final. Maya stared at him. You're not canceling, she asked. Daniel turned toward her, his expression calm but firm. No, he said. Why, she asked, her voice almost breaking. They're coming for you. Daniel held her gaze for a moment before answering. Exactly. The room went silent. It was Pierce who understood first. A slow smile formed on his face. You're not avoiding this, he said. You're walking into it. Daniel didn't deny it. If they believe the plan will succeed, he said, they will commit fully. Marcus shook his head slightly. You're turning yourself into bait. Daniel's response was immediate. I'm turning them into a mistake. Maya felt a chill run through her. This wasn't just about stopping a crime anymore. This was something else. Something calculated. Something strategic. What if something goes wrong? She asked. Daniel looked at her, his voice steady. Then we make sure it doesn't. The plan was set. The meeting would go ahead. The schedule would remain unchanged. And when Victor Hale's men made their move, they wouldn't find a victim. They would find something they never expected. As the first light of morning began to rise over the city, Maya finally understood one thing clearly. She hadn't just escaped her family. She had stepped into a war. And Daniel Whitmore had just decided. He wasn't going to run from it. He was going to end it. By the time evening settled over Manhattan, the city had returned to its usual rhythm, but beneath that surface, something far more deliberate was unfolding. The streets around the Whitmore Foundation building looked ordinary. Cars moved steadily, people arrived dressed for a formal donor event, and soft lights reflected against the glass exterior of the building. Nothing appeared unusual to the outside world, yet everything had been carefully arranged. Every entrance was monitored, every movement tracked, and every second accounted for. This was no longer just a gathering, it had become a stage. Inside Daniel Whitmore's townhouse, the final preparations were nearing completion. The atmosphere had shifted from tension to precision. No one raised their voice, no one moved without purpose, and every member of the security team operated with quiet efficiency. Marcus Reed stood near the center of the room, reviewing the last details with the team. He pointed toward the digital map displayed on the screen, outlining positions, timing, and contingencies with a clarity that left no room for confusion. 2 additional vehicles would follow at a distance, plain enough not to draw attention, but close enough to respond instantly. Communication channels had been secured, and Detective Pierce's team was already in position around the foundation building. Maya watched all of this from near the window, her hands wrapped tightly around each other, her mind racing despite the calm environment around her. She had never seen anything like this before. The world she came from reacted to problems. This world anticipated them, shaped them, controlled them. That realization both reassured her and unsettled her deeply. She had come here hoping to stop something terrible, but now she understood that what was about to happen wasn't just prevention, it was confrontation. Daniel Whitmore stood apart from the rest, adjusting his coat as if preparing for a normal evening event. His calmness hadn't changed since the moment she met him, but now Maya understood it differently. It wasn't indifference, it was control. He wasn't ignoring the danger, he had already accounted for it. You don't look like someone walking into a trap, Maya said quietly, unable to keep the thought to herself. Daniel glanced at her briefly. That's because I'm not, he replied. Marcus allowed himself a faint smile at that, though his eyes remained sharp. To them it is, he added. To us, it's an opportunity. The phone on the table vibrated, breaking the brief silence. Marcus picked it up immediately, placing it on speaker. Pierce's voice came through, steady but focused. He reported that multiple vehicles had left the warehouse near the Brooklyn waterfront and were heading toward Manhattan. The timing aligned perfectly with the expected schedule. This was no coincidence. The plan was in motion. Daniel didn't react outwardly, but the room seemed to tighten around his stillness. "Estimated arrival?" he asked. 40 minutes, Pierce replied. Marcus checked his watch. "That puts them just ahead of the event peak," he said. "Exactly where they'd want to be." Daniel nodded once. "Then we leave now." The decision was immediate. The team moved without hesitation. Marcus grabbed the keys to the black town car waiting outside, while the rest of the security team coordinated their positions. Maya stood up instinctively, her heart pounding. "I'm coming with you," she said. Marcus turned sharply. "No, you're not." "I need to see this through," Maya insisted, her voice steady despite everything. "This started because of my family." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, weighing something that wasn't spoken aloud. Finally, he shook his head slightly. "You've already done more than enough," he said, "and this part isn't yours to carry." Maya wanted to argue, but something in his tone made her stop. It wasn't dismissal, it was protection. And for the first time that night, she felt it clearly. The team departed, leaving the townhouse quieter than before, but not peaceful. Maya remained behind, standing near the window as the vehicles disappeared into the city. For a moment, she felt the weight of everything pressed down on her, the betrayal, the fear, the uncertainty of what would happen next. She didn't know if her father or brother were part of what was coming tonight, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened, nothing would ever go back to the way it was. At the Whitmore Foundation building, the event had already begun. Guests filled the lobby, conversations flowed easily, and nothing about the scene suggested the danger that lingered just beneath the surface. Daniel Whitmore entered precisely on schedule, greeted with the same respect and familiarity he always received. To everyone around him, he was exactly what they expected, composed, confident, in control. But this time, he was also waiting. Marcus remained close, his attention constantly shifting between the environment and the discreet updates coming through his earpiece. Every detail mattered now: the positioning of vehicles outside, the timing of arrivals, the subtle movements of individuals who might otherwise go unnoticed. Across the city, Pierce's team monitored the approaching vehicles. The same gray van and black SUVs identified earlier had entered Manhattan and were now moving toward the Foundation building. Their speed was steady, deliberate. This wasn't rushed. It was planned. Inside the building, something else was happening. A man stepped out from a side corridor, glancing around before pulling out his phone. His movements were subtle, almost invisible to anyone not looking for them, but Marcus saw it immediately on the surveillance feed. "That's him," Marcus muttered. Daniel didn't turn, but he understood. "The insider," he said quietly. The man, Richard Nolan, spoke briefly into his phone, then slipped it back into his pocket and returned to the main area as if nothing had happened. Pierce's voice came through moments later. "We traced the call," he said. "It went straight to the crew." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Then it's confirmed," he said. Marcus nodded. "They know you're here, they know the schedule is intact." Daniel's expression remained unchanged. "Good." Outside, the vehicles had arrived. They didn't stop directly in front of the building. Instead, they positioned themselves strategically, one near the service alley, another further down the street, and a third circling slowly. To anyone else, it might have looked like ordinary city traffic, but to those watching closely, it was clear. The trap was closing, or at least, they thought it was. At exactly 8:15 p.m., Daniel Whitmore exited the building just as he always did. The black town car waited at the curb, the driver's door already open. Marcus walked slightly ahead, scanning the surroundings, his posture calm but alert. Everything appeared normal. Until it was. The moment came fast. Too fast for anyone unprepared. But not for them. A van screeched into position, blocking the road ahead. Two men stepped out immediately, their movements aggressive and precise. At the same time, another vehicle cut off the rear, creating a perfect enclosure around the town car. To an outside observer, it would have looked like chaos. To Daniel, it was confirmation. "Now," Marcus said quietly. Everything changed in an instant. What the attackers didn't know was that they weren't surrounding a target. They were stepping into a controlled environment. Unmarked vehicles moved in from both sides of the street, faster than expected. Plainclothes officers emerged, weapons drawn, cutting off escape routes before the attackers could react. The driver of the van hesitated, realizing too late that something was wrong. Very wrong. Police, drop your weapons, Pierce's voice cut through the night. The men froze for a split second. That was all it took. Within moments, the entire scene shifted. What had been a planned abduction turned into a contained operation. The attackers were surrounded, outnumbered, and completely unprepared for resistance. One of them tried to run. He didn't make it far. Marcus stepped back slightly, his focus still sharp, ensuring there were no additional threats. Daniel remained exactly where he was, his expression unchanged, as if the outcome had never been in doubt. Because for him, it hadn't. As the situation was secured, Pierce approached, his coat moving slightly in the cold night air. He looked at Daniel and allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. Well, he said, that went better than they expected. Daniel glanced toward the captured men, his voice calm. Most things do, he replied. But as the scene settled, one question remained. And it was the most important one. Where was Victor Hale? Because a man like him doesn't make moves like this without watching. And somewhere, in the shadows of the city, he was. The flashing lights faded slowly from the street outside the Whitmore Foundation building, but the tension did not disappear with them. The police had secured the scene, the suspects had been taken into custody, and the carefully executed trap had unfolded exactly as planned. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like a successful operation, a clean intervention that stopped a dangerous crime before it could fully happen. But for Daniel Whitmore, the night was far from over. Because the real question had not yet been answered. Victor Hale had not been there. And a man like Hale never stayed uninvolved when something this significant was at stake. As the last of the vehicles were cleared from the street, Daniel stood quietly near the entrance of the building, his gaze fixed on the dark reflection in the glass doors. Marcus approached him, his tone low but direct. We've got everyone from the crew, he said, but no sign of Hale. Daniel nodded slightly as if he had expected that outcome all along. He was watching, Daniel replied. He just wasn't here. That realization changed everything. Because it meant this had never been the full plan, only a piece of it. Back at the townhouse, Maya sat in the same place near the window, her eyes fixed on the street below, waiting. Every passing car made her heart tighten, every distant sound made her turn her head. She didn't know what had happened yet, but she felt it. Something had shifted, something final. When the door finally opened, she stood instantly. Daniel entered first, followed by Marcus. Neither of them looked shaken, neither of them looked relieved, but something in their silence told her everything she needed to know. It's over, she asked. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time since she met him, there was a slight change in his expression. Not uncertainty, not doubt, but something heavier. No, he said, not yet. Maya felt her chest tighten. What does that mean? Marcus answered this time. It means the people who tried to take him are in custody, he said, but the man behind it all is still out there. The room fell quiet. Maya's thoughts immediately went somewhere else. My father, she whispered. Daniel didn't interrupt her this time. He allowed the silence to settle before speaking. Your father is part of this, he said calmly, but he's not the one in control. That didn't comfort her, because it meant something worse. What Maya didn't know was that at that very moment, in a dimly lit office overlooking the river, Victor Hale was watching the aftermath of his failed operation unfold on multiple screens. The images of his men being taken away, the coordinated response, the precision, it told him everything he needed to know. He had been outplayed. Not by chance, not by luck, but by design. And that was something Hale did not tolerate. He leaned back slowly, his expression darkening as the realization settled in. So, he said quietly, almost to himself, he knew. One of his associates stood nearby, hesitant to speak. What do we do now? Hale's answer was immediate. We correct the mistake. The next morning arrived without peace. Inside the townhouse, the atmosphere had changed. The sense of urgency was no longer hidden. It was direct, focused, and moving toward something inevitable. Detective Pierce arrived early, bringing new information that shifted everything again. "We found something," he said as he entered the study. Daniel looked up. "Go on." Pierce placed a file on the table. "Your girl was right," he said, nodding toward Maya. "Her father wasn't just involved, he was in direct contact with Hale's operation." Maya felt her breath catch. "And her brother?" Marcus asked. Pierce hesitated for a moment. "Also involved," he said, "but not in the way you think." That made everyone pause. "What do you mean?" Maya asked, her voice barely steady. Pierce looked at her carefully before answering. "Your brother wasn't leading anything," he said. "He was trying to survive it." That didn't make sense. "He was part of the plan," Maya said, shaking her head. "I heard him." "Yes," Pierce replied. "But we intercepted a call this morning. Your brother was trying to warn someone else. He knew this wasn't going to end well." The room fell silent again. For the first time since everything began, Maya's certainty cracked. Her father had chosen this. But her brother maybe hadn't. Before anyone could process that further, another update came in. This time it changed everything. Marcus received the call, his expression tightening as he listened. When he hung up, he looked directly at Daniel. "They found Hale," he said. The room froze. "Where?" Daniel asked. Marcus answered in a single sentence. "He's coming here." The words hung in the air like a storm about to break. Maya felt the weight of it immediately. "Why would he come here?" she asked. Daniel's answer was calm, but it carried something deeper. "Because he wants control back," he said, "and he thinks this is where he lost it." An hour later, a single black car pulled up outside the townhouse. No convoy. No chaos. Just one vehicle. And from it stepped Victor Hale. He didn't look like the man Maya had imagined. There was no obvious threat in his appearance, no visible sign of the danger he carried. But the moment he stepped inside, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't fear, it was presence. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. Marcus stayed close, his attention locked on every movement, but Daniel stepped forward calmly, as if greeting a business associate rather than a criminal mastermind. "Mr. Hale," Daniel said. Hale gave a faint smile. "Mr. Whitmore," he replied, "I must admit I didn't expect this outcome." Daniel's response was simple: "You should have." The two men stood facing each other, not as enemies shouting across a divide, but as equals in a silent confrontation of control, intelligence, and consequence. Hale's eyes shifted briefly toward Maya. "So," he said, "this is the reason." Maya felt the weight of his attention, but she didn't look away. "No," Daniel said before she could respond. "She's the reason you failed." What followed wasn't a fight. It was something far more dangerous. A conversation. Hale spoke first, his tone measured. "You could have avoided all of this," he said. Walked away, ignored it. Daniel shook his head slightly. "No," he said, "you made it my problem." Hale's smile faded. "And now?" he asked. Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady. "Now you don't get to do this again." There was a pause. A long one. Then Hale laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, but because he understood. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Outside, police vehicles began to arrive. Not rushed, not chaotic, but inevitable. Hale looked toward the door, then back at Daniel. "You planned all of this," he said. Daniel didn't deny it. "Yes." For a moment, Hale said nothing. Then finally, he nodded. "Impressive," he admitted. When the officers entered, Hale didn't resist. Because he already knew. The game was over. As he was taken away, the silence that followed felt different from before. Not tense, not uncertain. Final. Maya stood in the center of the room, everything catching up to her at once. The fear, the betrayal, the running, the choices, it all settled into a single overwhelming realization. It was over. Daniel turned toward her, his expression softer now, though still composed. "You did something very few people would have done," he said. Maya shook her head slightly. "I didn't have a choice." Daniel looked at her carefully. You always have a choice, he said. That was when he made the decision that no one expected. Your father will face the consequences of what he did, Daniel said. That part is not negotiable. Maya nodded slowly, her chest tight. And your brother, Daniel continued, will have a chance to explain himself. She looked up, surprised. But you, Daniel said, his voice steady, are not going back to that life. Maya didn't understand. What do you mean? Daniel gestured slightly around the room. It means, he said, that the moment you chose to run here instead of staying silent, you changed your future. A pause. If you're willing, he added, you won't have to start over alone. Maya felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not pain, something new. Hope. For the first time in her life, someone wasn't deciding her worth based on what they could gain from her. Someone was offering her a choice. A real one. And this time, she would make it herself.